Chapter 11. The Divine Light Within is an Unerring Guide in Human Life. One of the mistakes of the religious world has been that men have sought without for that which they can only find within. The drowning man can be saved by a plank or a rope that a friendly hand throws to him, and he will even grasp at a straw. But there are circumstances of mental suffering and anxiety when the metaphorical plank and rope will not save us. How much better for a man to learn that somewhere in the compass of his own being, in the enclosure of his own nature, is to be found the principle of buoyancy that will keep him afloat, and then the rope and the plank will be serviceable but not indispensable. Tradition, the dogmas of the church, the authority of an external book, and the outward machinery of worship are the plank, the rope, and the straw thrown to a man in a flood of doubt and spiritual distress. But all these have become waterlogged and can barely keep themselves afloat in the public mind and are fast sinking out of sight. And must we sink? By no means. The principle of Christianity and of every true religion is within the soul, the recognition of the incarnation of God in every human being. Let us grasp this truth in all its fullness of meaning and strike out and gain the shore. God is to us the fountain of life, and in his light we see light as a guide to duty, and in the discovery of spiritual truth, some higher faculty and diviner light than mere reason is needed. This has been felt and acknowledged in all ages of the world. In the Alexandrian schools of philosophy, which reproduced with modifications the speculations of Plato, and in the modern idealistic systems of Germany, and even in the metaphysics of Sir William Hamilton, and in the mystic writers of all ages, the incapacity of reason alone to solve the problems of philosophy and morality is fully confessed. The infallible and unerring guide of men's souls is not, and cannot be, an external book, but an interior light which quickens our spiritual intelligence, so that it becomes the light of life. The state of illumination in which spiritual truths are clearly seen has received different names. Plotinus denominated this higher faculty ecstasy, a state in which the mind becomes freed from the trammels of sense and of the body. St. Bernard calls it contemplation, George Fox, the inward voice. Schelling called it the intellectual intuition, and Kant, the pure reason. Jacobi called it faith arising from feeling. Pythagoras designated it as the great light and salt of ages. Plutarch called it the interior guide and everlasting fountain of virtue. With Socrates it was the good demon or spirit. This was not, as has been generally supposed, an individual spirit or guardian angel. The word he uses will not bear that construction. It is not demon but daimonion, which properly signifies a divine or spiritual influence. In the system of Confucius, the Chinese philosopher, it is spoken of as the principle by which simple and ignorant men and women of the most ordinary capacity may know all that appertains to their ordinary actions and conduct every day of their lives. In its highest form of experience, Swedenborg calls it perception and a state of illustration, or interior illumination. In the New Testament, this inward, divine light is called the Comforter or Paraclete, the inward teacher, the Spirit of truth, which is to guide us into all truth. In the Old Testament, it is called the Word of the Lord that came to the prophets and to Moses, and which in the first chapter of John is called the true light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. It is the source of every genuine inspiration. Under its influence, the mind is raised in its action far above the decision of the senses, and even of the logical consciousness or the reasoning faculty. In this interior illumination, all truth becomes self-evident. It is seen in its own light and loved for its own divine self. As a guide in life, it is far above the letter of the word, and is that without which the external book would be of little use. It is of higher authority than any system of rules drawn from the Bible. For, as Paley long ago said, whoever expects to find in the Scriptures a specific direction for every moral doubt that may arise, looks for more than he will there find. We need every day, and every hour, the same inspiration by which they were written. In our interpretation of the book, we need some divine illuminating power to break the seals and open the volume. The answer of the eunuch to Philip, when he was asked, "Understandest thou what thou readest?" will always have its application to us. How can I, except someone guide me? This interior light, this paraclete, or divine instructor, is always available. For, as I, too, Fichte has truly remarked, inspiration is a far more universal idea than its theological acceptation has admitted, while the ordinary systems of psychology have wholly ignored it. That there is such a thing as an immediate revelation of truth from God to the human soul has been admitted and taught by nearly all theological writers, and those of the most diverse opinions on other doctrines. Jonathan Edwards, in a sermon on Matthew, proves that there is such a thing as a spiritual and divine light immediately imparted to the souls of men by God. This is a doctrine that has always been maintained by the Society of Friends and is the characteristic tenet of their system of religion. John Wesley taught the same thing in his 2 sermons on the witness of the Spirit, in which he affirms that God directly impresses the spirit of the believer with the fact of his pardon and with the assurance of the divine favor. This is the distinctive doctrine of Methodism, according to Dr. Abel Stevens. But why confine divine revelation to this one point? Can God speak to us only on one subject, that of our pardon and the forgiveness of our sins? Paul L. takes a broader view and declares that we can have no knowledge of spiritual things except it be imparted to us by the Spirit of God, which reveals them to us. Theodore Parker extends the idea of inspiration further than Edwards or Wesley. He makes inspiration to consist in the direct and intuitive perception of some truth, either of thought or sentiment, and that this is the action of the highest within the soul, the divine presence imparting light. In Till's view, Newton was as really inspired as Moses, for it was a more difficult thing to write the Principia than the Decalogue. As God speaks and acts in the material world by what we call the laws of nature, so his eminence in man gives to the legitimate and unperverted action of all the powers of the mind the dignity of a divine law, an interior and unwritten decalogue. This is according to the prophetic announcement that the time would come when the Lord would put, or rather, as it is more literally translated, give, his laws in our minds and write them upon our hearts, or, as it is expressed by Jeremiah, the Lord would put his law in our inward parts. In accordance with the prevailing tendency to limit the action of God in man, there is only one faculty that has been accepted as his organ of communication with man. It has been so often asserted that conscience is the voice of God in man that it has become a religious axiom. This is undoubtedly true, but is God everywhere else silent in the human soul? Does he not speak and act through all our faculties? On the subject of conscience, Reid, the Scotch metaphysician, says in the conclusion of his chapter on the sense of duty, the sum of what has been said in this chapter is that by an original power of the mind which we call conscience, or the moral faculty, we have the conceptions of right and wrong in human conduct, of merit and demerit, of duty and moral obligation, and our other moral conceptions, and that by the same faculty we perceive some things in human conduct to be right and others to be wrong, that the first principles of morals are the dictates of this faculty, and that we have the same reason to rely upon those dictates as upon the determination of our senses, or of our other natural faculties. On the subject of a divine light within, I have only space in this chapter to quote the language of F. Fornellan, Archbishop of Cambrai, as one of the best representatives of the mystic theology. He says, out of the depths of his own experience, it is easy to perceive that our feeble reason is continually set to rights by another superior reason, which we consult within ourselves, and which corrects us. This reason we cannot change, because it is immutable, but it changes us because we have need of it. All consult this everywhere. It answers in China as in France and America. It does not divide itself in communicating itself. The light it gives me takes nothing from those who were before filled with it. It communicates itself at all times immeasurably, and is never exhausted. It is the sun that enlightens mind as the outward sun does bodies. This light is eternal and immense. It comprehends all time as well as all space. It is not myself. It reproves and corrects me against my will. It is then above me, and above all weak and imperfect men as I am. This supreme reason which is the rule of mind, this wisdom from which every wise man receives his, this supreme spring of light, is the God we seek. The guiding principle of our lives is to be found not in a book, or in a whole library of works on theology, but as the voice of God in the depths of our own being. It is not a self-derived intelligence, but a constant revelation of a present and living God. He's our light and our salvation. P.S. 27. 1. In harmony with this view, Jesus the Christ says to all human souls, "Why judge ye not of your own selves what is right?" This is a truth of not mere speculative interest, but of great practical value. It has its application to all the duties of life from the least to the greatest, and to the means of recovery to mental and bodily health and happiness. This inward oracle will not only teach us in regard to our moral and religious duties, but will give us the most unerring prescription for our mental and physical maladies.